just wanted to take a quick second to thank you guys for doing this, because this is historical, as people in the virtual auditorium have been saying. And I wanted to thank you guys and Adora Evans for making this possible on the Los Angeles Tribune. And it would not be possible without Kyle Wilson. So let's go ahead and bring him in and get the conversation rolling. And Adora, how excited are you to have Kyle join us in this engaging dialogue?
Oh, I'm so excited. Kyle and I met because people kept talking to each of us about each other or something like that. So it didn't take me long to learn how much of the self-development industry has been impacted by Kyle Wilson. So I'm going to give the floor to Kyle so he can ask some questions. Kyle, welcome. And thank you for bringing Brian. You're responsible for this particular reunion, which was so important to Mo that he promised me a trip if I got this done. Just FYI. So thank you. You are having us all win right now.
Hey, thank you so much. And Brian and Dennis, two of my great mentors in my life. And I just took another, 5 pages of notes. And this is like the 50th time, right? You guys mentioned another of my mentors, Jim Rohn, multiple times. And, I was so honored in 2004. You both spoke at the Jim Rohn 3-day event. And my favorite photo was the 3 of you guys at a table. And Brian, of course, you and I did our first seminar in Atlanta in 1991 with Og Mandino, which was incredible. And then later on with Jim Rohn. And of course, Dennis, you and I started working together in 2004. And we just did the 3-day retreat. So this is such an honor to be with you guys. And I hate to interrupt the conversation. This has been incredible listening to you guys.
No, Kyle, you're more than just the cement that puts and the glue that puts things together. You're in your own right. Tony Robbins learned a lot from Jim Rohn, as we know. And you not only learned a lot from Jim, but you also made it possible for Jim to be heard worldwide. And you really were the wind beneath his wings. More than that. And you synthesized and internalized not only a lot of Jim, but you've also added your own experiences, which have had the same roller coaster event that we've had in our lives. So it's so great to be, and then you and I and Brian, and even John Asrath were over at the house. And if we wouldn't have been all together, this wouldn't have happened. So it's great. We want to hear some of your take. So what are some of the things that you can add? And Brian and I also want to ask Brian a question or ask me one, but bring a little of your Kyle Wilson, Jim Rohn experience in too. What do you think Jim would say if he were here with us today?
Oh, wow. He would be, just like you were saying, he would be listening. He would be taking notes. And, again, I just want to echo everything you both have been teaching. It's fundamentals. It's, as Mo had just said, it's principle based. And that's why it has stood the test of time. And, the thing I think people say, what's the biggest lesson I learned from Jim? And there's so many, but Brian was talking about bringing value, right? In his new book, the ability to bring value to the marketplace. And that's something you both have always done. And that's what I've tried to build my career on, is making money is in direct proportion to the ability to serve people and to bring value. And so I'm just so grateful for that. And I think in this particular moment in time, they asked Jim, hey, what's the future going to be like? And he said, oh, the future will be 2 things. It'll be opportunity mixed with difficulty. So I think that's not changed, right? Any of us that think these are the most difficult times in history just haven't traveled a lot and haven't read a lot. There have been much, much, much more difficult times in history. So Brian, I loved you sharing about the 25 civilizations. That was powerful. I've not heard you talk about that before. So thank you for sharing that.
It's important to understand that, and Dennis was saying it, is how will things be in the future? They'll be different from today.
Yeah, I know both of you are optimists, right? It's like you're not, you can share truth, about difficulties and challenges, but yet you're the ultimate optimist because you believe in the human spirit. You believe in, you know, how God set this thing up. And so it's nothing new. It's just the way it is. And Dennis, I remember in 2004 at the Jim Rohn 3-day event, you talking about China, you talking about some of the things that you thought were mindsets here in America that were hindering us potentially. You know, looking now 17 years later, what have you seen happen the last 17 years? Not to put you on the spot, that's kind of a difficult question, but.
Well, I've sure seen a lot. You know, I was in 50 Chinese cities in 2018. So I thought it was really great. Me in 50 cities. Had I known that it would have been better to do a Zoom in the 50 cities rather than be there. But I learned a lot about China. I learned that they're more capitalistic in many ways than we are. I know they're not as concerned about the environment as we might be. And I know they're very concerned about the material aspects of life. I know that Confucius and some of the ancient Chinese wisdom has been cast aside for a while. And I know that maybe money is more important to them in many ways, some ways, than the spiritual development has been. And yet, on the other hand, I can't say that because I know many Chinese who are absolutely intent on teaching their children all about their ancestors, about their grandparents. They even set the table for their grandparents who are not alive. And on Chinese New Year, they go over all the history of their families together. So just as you could talk about Chinese being the adversary, you can talk about them also having been one of the earliest civilizations. And what I've learned is no society has ever survived its own success. There comes a time usually when you forget what you learned from the older generation and you forget what it takes to continue to succeed because you think it comes automatically just because you're born in that particular society. And I think we have to keep giving rebirth over and over again, and we recycle this because it doesn't just continue of its own accord. Everything changes, and I've never seen a society that will usually last longer than 300 years unless the younger generation is taking responsibility for their outcomes and learning from the mistakes that have gone before them. So you need to learn from history so you don't repeat it. And you need to learn from your mistakes so you don't repeat them. But I think you need to be an optimist because optimism does rule every entrepreneur.
Absolutely. Brian, what do you have there?
Well, you're watching. This is a book, and I did about several thousand hours of research, travel, speaking, and then I wrote this book, and the book is called Something for Nothing. Something for Nothing, and it says the causes and cures of all our problems and what you can do to save the American dream. And I began to study this 50 years ago and writing on it and traveling and speaking. And I'm now working to get it republished because when it came out, there's always little problems that occur. But basically what it says, I call it the SFN theory, something for nothing, is that people get this idea that it's possible to get more than you get more out than you put in. And they start to look for getting something for less or something for even less and something for eventually for nothing. Then it destroys their personalities. It basically destroys their characters because you have to be willing to pay the price of success. There's that great Western song, what's that? Pay the price and believe. If you, what is that? You cannot and achieve. But basically, it says that you've got to be willing to pay the price for the success that you want, and right from the beginning. And then you got to pay it even harder. Is you have to work really, really hard, and you have to be prepared. As you and I, Kyle, have worked together. Geez, we're going back 30 years, you and I, and we have to be prepared to work a long time. And Dennis was talking about crashing through in his 50s, and that's not unusual. Most people don't succeed until they've had all of these years of putting in before you can finally start taking out. So what I think is the great destructive factor is something for nothing. People are trying to get something for nothing, looking for something for nothing. And I say, you can't get something for nothing. It just simply doesn't work out. And if you do try to get something for nothing, you're going to end up getting nothing for something. And
that philosophy has always been there, right? People, yes. Because you guys have been doing this for a while. And when you look at today versus, the 70s, 80s, 90s, there's always been that, how can I get there? The get rich quick, if you will.
Yes.
And that's what I love about both of you, as well as Jim Rohn. The philosophy was very principle based. And when you do the right principles, it's guaranteed, right? Success is guaranteed. And Dennis, you talked about even financially with investing. Last time we had a conversation, even in the 60s, when you started, you shifted how you approached investing. And yet, people think, why would you start that in your 60s? But it's guaranteed if you do the right principles. And this is true for health. It's true for money. It's true for business. Why is it difficult for people to understand that? Because it is noisy, right? It's noisy out in the marketplace. People wanting to promise the get there faster, quicker, without having to do the core principles.
Yes.
Well, first of all, we all want to rub the lamp and have the genie come out and say, you got three wishes, and you rub the genie and you think there's this magic lamp that you can rub, and it just, that's an illusion that we all want to believe in, that you can get more out than you put in. And that it just, in my life, it has never worked that way at all. And I've not met anyone who's been a true success over a long period who hasn't put in the effort. That's one thing. And I think, how to get anything you want by doing nothing would probably be a bestseller, but it wouldn't have anything written in it. Remember, that's what the book is. It's what men need to know, or what men know about women. And there's that title of that book, and then you open it up, and the pages are all blank, because men don't really understand, because they don't listen enough. We tend to say it and do it, and then say, oh, gee, I forgot to listen, or I don't take the time. So that's one thing that we learned. But another thing is, I just don't believe in taking more than I put in. I'll say it over and over again. If you always give more value than you receive in payment, you'll always be sought for the bargain that you deliver by giving more in value than you expect to receive. But if you expect to be paid more than you give in time, in effort, and value, then it's an illusion for you. You may get more money, but you will not get the character, respect. Who wants to be famous if you're not respected? Who wants to be known by the masses as somebody who's a taker? Who wants to be a Ponzi scheme guy? None of us wants to be that. And none of us wants to do it in a, shall we say, criminal or less than ethical way. Who wants to be unethical? Does anyone want to be unethical because that's the way to get to the top? Of course not. We all have this deep heart inside. And so I echo what Jim has said, what Brian has said, what Napoleon Hill has said, what the Lord has said, what Confucius say. Confucius say, women like river, man like rock. Rock crumble and wear away under river, but river continues to flow. And I say, wait a minute, are you saying that the weaker sex is actually stronger? No, there is no weaker sex. River runs deep, river runs, but it makes music softer than hard rock. So I learned from the Tao Te Ching, from Lao Tzu. In fact, that young Chinese guy did say, wow, you went to school with Confucius. I said, no, he's 1,800 years old. I'm only 800 years old. He said, well, you spew out this Chinese wisdom. And I said, the ancient Chinese and the Egyptians and the Mayans and the Incas and the Aztecs and And like Brian says, you study the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the British Empire, and the American Empire. And you find that empires don't last. Only synergistic societies do that are making the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And you have to be looking at that. And that's why we study history, so that we look at the bad and the good together and say, let's not do that again. Let's not be that way next time. But let's not run away from history. Let's learn from it.
Well said, Dennis. Hey, Brian and Dennis, thanks for letting me hop on, and didn't mean to interrupt your conversation, but such an honor to talk to both of you guys today. Thank you for the impact you've had on my life and the impact you've had on so many. I'm going to hand it back to Mo and Adora. But
thank you, Kyle.
And thanks for taking your Sunday, by the way, to be with us today. So thank you, guys.
And also, Kyle, we want to take a quick second to thank you, Kyle, for the work that you do, because you have helped keep Jim Rohn's legacy as active, as relevant as it was when the gentleman was here in physical form. And there was a very touching comment here from Amy Jacobs. 100% that Jim Rohn is here in spirit.
Yes.
And he is looking down upon this experience right now, smiling from ear to ear. I would agree, Amy. I would thank you, Kyle, for the work that you do. This is indeed the New Psychology of Winning Tour, a historical moment, no matter how you look at it. I want to thank Brian and Dennis, and we're going to have a few more minutes here before we move on to our next segment. But before we do that, since we do have Brian Tracy here, and since this tour is largely about the personal development field, changing lives, transforming individuals, but also Denis Waitley. Now, one thing that I've learned in the short time that I have been privileged and honored and humbled with the opportunity to work with Denis Waitley is he doesn't talk about himself. It's amazing. So I'm going to ask Denis Waitley for permission to ask Brian Tracy in closing to share with our audience what he wants to share with our audience, but specifically about the impact that Denis Waitley has made.
Mo, we don't ask Dennis for permission on this. Dennis doesn't get to say. Dennis doesn't get to say. Brian.
I will assert that and just ask Brian directly to speak on the impact that Denis Waitley has had in the personal development field. And Kyle, you'll stick around with us. Please,
Okay.
Brian.
Well, that's a trick question because I don't know where I would approach it from. But I will say this. When I first listened to Dennis, it was right at the beginning of the audio cassette industry. The only thing that was out there was Lead the Field with Earl Nightingale. And the whole idea of actually producing a program other than Lead the Field or rather than Earl Nightingale was completely anathema to Nightingale Conant. However, one thing led to another, and they produced Denis's program, and they broke the bank at Monte Carlo. Is maybe Earl's programs, and Earl's programs were excellent, but Denis's program just broke the bank. And I had never listened to an audio program before, but I got one of their beautiful brochures, and it promised the moon. And so I purchased Denis's program, and I listened to it several times. My wife and I listened to it, and what it did is it's kind of just, I say, imagine coming home at night and the house is dark and you run around the house turning on the lights. Well, that's what happens when you listen to Psychology of Winning. Basically, if you've not been exposed to these ideas, you start running around your mental house turning on lights. As you're starting to, holy smokes, wow. And you're starting to see things and have perceptions of things that you hadn't thought about before. And then basically you just had one run through, you want to do it again and again. And so what Denis did is he kind of just broke open this whole way of thinking. So within, I think, 5 years, there are 500 audio programs in the market somewhere. People were producing them all over the world. And Denis broke the ground. Denis was the front runner there. And he really helped me. And I always sort of refer to him with a certain amount of reverence because he is such a good guy and his program was such a good program. And so knowing Denis and working with Denis and learning from Denis has been one of the most important things in my life. And I would just suggest, if you have not listened to The Psychology of Winning by Denis Waitley, then before this is over, you must order it and listen to it. You must order it and listen to it. And then if you want something additional, I may have something.
And then go and check out The Psychology of Achievement after that.
It will be helpful to you.
Denis Waitley, we'd love to hear your thoughts on what Brian just said, and also on Brian Tracy's impact in the industry. And we want to hear your thoughts on Brian, just as we've heard Brian's thoughts on you. Please, Denis Waitley.
Well, I'd like to say it in fewer words, but because I could go on for the rest of the show and talk about that. But what I will say is, Brian, Bob Proctor said something that I need to correct. We didn't sell 100 million albums because there's 6 cassettes in an album, and the albums cost $50 a piece, as you and I know. So over a period of time, Nightingale Conant may have sold $100 million worth of gross sales of the album over a long period of time. So when we say broke the bank, what happened is direct marketing worked. America needed something on winning. It came along after Lead the Field. Earl Nightingale helped promote it. The content was good enough. And then lo and behold, I was able to be on the stage with the same people that I was talking about, the Brian Tracys, the Stephen Coveys, the Robert Schulers, the Paul Harveys, the Art Linkletters, the Jim Rohns, the Zig Ziglars, Norman Vincent Peale. I got a chance to be with the people that I had always admired and studied. And Brian, as my neighbor 10 minutes away, I wouldn't mind living in the same room of your house so I could get more of you up front, close and personal. You're one of the greatest influencers, as Jim Rohn has been, as a thought leader in the world of business, personal and professional life. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I was so blessed to know that the psychology of achievement, the psychology of you could do the psychology of everything, because that's how well read and learned you are. And talk about application. I'm going to write that down. And when you said write it down, and Jim Rohn said you're going to want to write this down, your impact on me has been, I do write it down. And when you're my age, your list is short. It's very clear. Your handwriting is not as good, but you write it down and you think it, you see it, write it down, and you do it. Because you do it because now you know that time is the only equal opportunity employer. And when you have 168 hours a week to spend, but none to save, I have never known a scientist to invent another minute. So just remember, each minute that you go on what you've written down, that you're focused on doing, you're on your way to become successful. And Brian, the long story and short of it is, all I can say is you're one of the greatest, and it's my privilege to be in your company, to have this conversation, which I wish we would have every day of the week. And we should have it at least once a month at the minimum, because we live so close. Yes. And Kyle, I have to say to you too, you're not just a connector and somebody who's helped other people. You came to my home, you recorded me, you have gotten me out to a market. You helped my career at a time when people were saying, oh yes, is he still alive? And so people would say, I didn't know he was still alive. So you breathed new life into my career, but you also made it possible to have a marvelous retreat at our home and share with your inner circle, where we all got together and talked over life. So you're also a very powerful influence in my life and will be in the future. But I've got to say, if what Mo said, what do you have to say about Brian? Everything and not enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how we can top it. This is the New Psychology of Winning tour. I want to thank Brian Tracy once again. I'm going to thank Denis Waitley, and we will graciously go to the next segment with Kyle Wilson. because Brian, you've been so generous with your time. Please, Adora, go ahead.
Yes, Brian, thank you so much for coming here today. I loved watching your face light up and your laughter and the laughter that you brought to Dennis. You guys, it was tremendous just to share in your camaraderie. And, you know, may we all you've blessed so many of us. We grew up listening to you guys, and this has been a gift that will be watched again and again. So thank you so much. And Dennis, you know, I love you so much, and we'll see you at 2:55 PST, Dennis.
Very good.
Thank you, Adora.
Thanks, Brian.
Love you both.
Thank you, Kyle.
See you soon.
I love you. Hey, let's get together sooner than another month. I owe you a dinner. I think I'll take you to a nice restaurant.
Remember,
I'm only drinking liquids, but I'll drink my liquid as if it's sea bass and Chateaubriand. So whatever I do, I'll pretend. I'll remember what it tastes like, but I'll call you first, because I'm not going to say let's get together sometime. I'm going to call you and let's make it happen.
Wonderful. I love you, Dennis.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I love you guys.
And Adora, stick around. We have another segment here with Kyle. Wow. Let's do a quick debrief. Kyle, what are your thoughts on that incredible moment in time that we were able to experience here live on the LA Tribune TV network?
Yeah, it was amazing. And, you know, I've spent so much time with Brian and Dennis. They've been on my podcast, the whole thing, go back 30 years. And I always learn something new. And Mo and Adora, first of all, great job. I mean, you brought together some amazing people, Les, John, Bob, and of course, Brian, with, you know, my mentor, Denis Waitley. So it's great, phenomenal job. It takes so much to put this on. But yeah, I took at least 5 pages of notes. Here's what I love with interviews of that type. And you put Brian and Dennis together, and it reminds me of me putting Jim Rohn together with contemporaries. What comes out is wisdom. It's not just the seminar. And that's why I felt like I heard so many things that were new for me, because we're tapping into what's just the tip of the iceberg of what they both know. And that was the beauty of it. It wasn't a 60-minute presentation, although those are so powerful. It was tapping into wisdom. And to see the questions that were being brought up between them, what's important to them. And if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we would also realize it's important to us and to our kids and to our world. And so, you know, I was honored just to sit there and take notes. I felt bad that I was in any way impeding them going longer because it was really a beautiful thing to watch.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to step back, Adora, and have you and Kyle have a powerful conversation together. But I agree, Kyle, that was nothing short of a historical moment, as folks in the comment section agreed to. Hey, Adora, what did you run off to? I guess you and I are sticking around for a couple minutes here, Kyle. But let's talk a little bit before Adora comes back about Jim Rohn. You know, someone left in the comment section that they could feel Jim Rohn's presence with Brian Tracy and Denis Waitley. And, you know, what was the man like for those that don't have the same kind of didn't have the same kind of access to him that you've had, that maybe the audience does not know about Jim Rohn?
Yeah, and I'll agree with Amy. I remember her comment. I felt Jim's presence. I felt Jim's presence often. He passed away in 2009, and I've had some incredible moments that I have felt him show up truly, and other people have as well. And so, yes, I echo that. Yeah, Jim was amazing. And first of all, he's very private. Like a lot of people will message me, hey, Kyle, I want to see Jim Rohn's journals. Well, that's not going to happen. You know, he was very private, but he was authentic. So who you saw on stage is who you saw behind stage. And he really did not want to be famous per se. He wanted to have impact. And one of my favorite quotes by Jim was that he would tell me, it wasn't a quote on stage, it was a one-on-one quote. He'd say, Kyle, I want to be the guy that impacts the few that impact the many.
Mm.
Well, guess what? You look at Tony Robbins, you look at Darren Hardy, Eric Worre, Hal Elrod, the list goes on and on and on of his students that he impacted. So he was the guy. He did impact more than the few, but that really was his goal. His goal wasn't to I own Jim Rohn International, and I would book him up 100+ dates, and he'd say, we got to back this off. And he wanted me to back off how many interviews, and he would turn down book deals. And because he really was about living a life he wanted to live and having an impact that could really have a ripple effect. And he did that.
It's so awesome. And I want to dive into some of those moments that you felt him show up. And first just share, I know I've shared this with you before, but I was living in a boarded up home at 18 with no electricity. And I had already lived on my own from the age of 15 and for a little while at 12, and exposed to an adventurous life, a colorful life like many already. And instead of paying for my electricity, I invested in a distributor kit. And so on a Walkman radio with Jim Rohn was the very first cassette tape that I got. And Jim was saying, hey, you're in this metaphor. You could probably quote it, Kyle. You're in this metaphorical sailboat is what he was talking about. And that you're going to arrive at a destination. I felt like he was talking right to me. There wasn't sheetrock in the walls. It was kind of dim. And he said, the good news is all you have to do is set your sail in a new direction. It may take you longer than it takes other people, but if you just keep heading there, you will arrive. And he said, go get mentors. And I thought, oh no one's going to mentor me. I'm the town scandal. I'd already been divorced. I was supposed to marry a pastor. I ran away in the middle of the night. And then he said, go get mentors. And so he said, the library is full of them. And, I'm one of many, 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 many people that feel like Jim Rohn, Denis Waitley, these different people talked right to them. So how did you and Jim originally come into contact?
And real quick, Adora, before Kyle answers that, Dr. Natalie Forrest and Rex are, of course, helping us with the New Psychology of Winning tour. So we're going to invite them back. And Adora, if you want to stick around, let's go ahead and bring Rex Sykes and Dr. Natalie Forrest, two legends in their own right. Of course, Rex Sykes, Kyle, has been in the business for about 40 years. Natalie is very prominent in the women's empowerment field. And so we want to have a mastermind session here and give them an opportunity to also pick your brain, Kyle. So with that being said, Rex and Natalie, welcome to the conversation. Kyle, please go ahead and answer Adora's question. Thank you.
Hi, Natalie and Rex.
Hi, Kyle.
Yeah, my story was I grew up in a small town, never went to college, and actually got in trouble, was doing drugs, the whole thing. So I can relate, Adora. And I heard a whisper actually to sell. I had started a small business and to sell it and to move to Dallas, which seemed kind of crazy. But so the first lesson is listen to the small whispers. And I did. And I didn't know who Jim Rohn was, but within a year of moving to a new place, not really knowing anyone and not having anything going on, I attended a seminar, and the guy putting on the seminar was looking to hire people. And he said, you're going to have to make 100 cold calls a day. You're going to have to go speak. Well, 100 cold calls, that seemed crazy, but speaking seemed impossible. The fear of speaking was huge for me, but I still felt in that bubble, that whisper in that bubble. And that led to me becoming his top sales rep, and then eventually led to me meeting Jim Rohn and promoting Jim Rohn. And after I started putting on these events and got really good at it, and then I'm traveling around the country, and that's when I started hiring Brian Tracy and Og Mandino and Jim Rohn. And after about 3 years, I'm getting now 2,500 people for an event. And Jim came to me one day and he said, listen, for this next event, me and my partner have split up. He owes me $500,000. So just from now on, just go through me. I said, hey, Jim, I think I'm a pretty good promoter. I think you're the world's best speaker. I would love to have an exclusive. And that idea was probably better to me than it was to him. He was really looking for a partner. So I said, listen, it'll be my company. I'll pick up the tab. I'll pay for everything. And I'll pay you like a speakers bureau off the top. I just want exclusivity. And that first year took him from 20 dates to 110, tripled his speaking fee, and started creating products. And one of the first products became a viral tool I sold 6 million of. And then we were off to the races. And I would say the thing about Jim was he was almost, for a promoter, he was almost like the gateway drug to personal development. People would hear Jim Rohn and they're like, I need more of this. So I started another company called Your Success Store. And that's when I got to start selling Brian Tracy and Les Brown and Mark Victor Hansen and Denis Waitley, and started booking them for all the companies I was taking Jim into, and started creating their products, and ended up creating over 100 intellectual properties and built a big seminar team. And, you know, it was just a phenomenal relationship because Jim was a pure speaker philosopher, much like Denis, you know, and then I got to be a pure marketer promoter. And I remember, I'm being kind of long-winded here on this one, and then I'll just want to get this in. I remember the first time I heard Brian Tracy, and he was, it was a Zig Ziglar Brian Tracy event. And I don't even think I was a seminar promoter yet. I went to this event and I was so attracted to Brian, I took like 20 pages of notes. And so fast forward 3 years later, I am now promoting him for the first time. And I remember the first time I got a flyer in the mail from Nightingale promoting Denis Waitley. So you have these moments that, and by the way, that first event I did with Brian, with Augmandino, I'd actually hired Denis, and we couldn't make the deposit in time and they canceled us. And in 2004, at the big Jim Rohn 3-day event I put on, he said, my biggest regret was not working with you earlier. And I said, I hate to tell you this, but I did hire you in 1991. And we missed the deadline. But yeah, Jim, unbelievable. Brian, unbelievable. Denis, unbelievable. These are mega thought leaders, but more importantly, principle-based thought leaders that if you do what they teach, that's one of the biggest lessons I got from Jim, that success is predictable. And if you do the right things in the right order over time, you're guaranteed success. Not the shortcut stuff, but the real stuff.
Well, I know Natalie and Rex are eager to talk with you. And when I'm here, I sometimes just keep firing. So I'm going to ask one more question and go in the background for a minute and come back in with that. And when I come back, I want to know about one of those moments you felt, Jim. So Natalie and Rex, you're not allowed. That question's not yours. So I just, one of my favorite things about you is what you just talked about. You've worked with a lot of people in the industry, and you could work with a lot more, but you're my kind of guy, and Denis is my kind of guy, because your integrity and principles are everything to you. And people say that, but it doesn't take long. And in a person's space, you can feel where they stand with all that. And you very quickly, it is who you are. So can you speak a little bit about that? Why integrity? Why principles?
Thank you, Adora. And I'll say it's self-serving too. It's the shortcut. It's the thing that actually works in life. It's how it's set up. And so I was raised that way. But I also have realized, Zig Ziglar said something that really impacted me greatly 30 years ago. He said, never do a good deal with a bad guy. And that's not just principles, that's truth. That doesn't work. And so it's a shortcut to success. I'll just say from a very practical standpoint. On the other side, it takes faith though. I think we have to beat our head against the wall sometimes to say, oh, that get rich quick thing is actually going to slow me down. That partner that doesn't have integrity is going to actually slow me down. So I think, but it does take faith, and sometimes it takes experience. because you want to have integrity without judgment, right? You want to have principles without judgment. So I try not judge someone else. I just have to say, does that really fit into the things I want to represent, that I want to value, where I want to invest my time? Eventually, that's the big question. Who and what and where do I want to invest my time? And I am, my wiring was like a type A aggressive person. I've definitely mellowed. So you're going to make some mistakes and you're going to do some things. And if you're paying attention, you'll say, that's not where I want to invest time. Here's where I definitely want to invest time. And so for me, also age has helped me, I think, really realize, like just the conversation with Dennis and Brian, that's where I want to be. I want to soak that in, right? And just learn from it.
I love that you said that. This is my comment and I'm passing. I love that you shared that you were type A, which we celebrate, and aggressive, which has how is that? And you said, now I've calmed that down a little bit. I think real leaders authentically share, look, there's some of this that didn't work out for me. Right. And that's how I learned.
I wouldn't be here, Adora, honestly, if I wasn't out trying to take over the seminar world and fill up huge rooms. And then I had to learn with that, that worked here, but it didn't work relationally. And even though Jim Rohn was my mentor, I didn't have ears to hear at the time on some of those subtleties that as I've gotten older, I think I get it now a little more, right?
Okay, Rex and Natalie, I'm going to be kind.
Thanks, Adora.
You're welcome.
Good stuff.
Cool. I would say, Kyle, just thank you for keeping the source alive, because so often the source is lost. We all quote people and we forget to quote them. And so things get passed on, and you've managed to keep that alive. I kid Tony by saying, if you wait long enough, every quote in the world will be attributed to Tony Robbins. And you have a history and preserved the legacy of so many. So we really do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would also say, and then I'll pass to Natalie, but I would also like to say, this is you and the people you've worked with represent what Napoleon Hill would call a true mastermind, where there's a division of labor. Each person has their expertise. Many content providers who are really good content makers and providers can't market, don't know how to do what you do. And you bring them, in an aligned vision, you bring them to the world and have uplifted them so that they can uplift others. And that is truly a demonstration of what's possible when people work together in harmony and share a vision. So thank you for that.
No, thank you.
All right. I think I can jump in. Kyle, it's such a pleasure, such an honor to meet you. I love how you bring all these minds together and how you connect people. If you've heard me before ask questions, I usually try to ask a little different questions. And one of the things that has struck me throughout these days here, now we're on day 3, is that from all of those legends thus far, we keep hearing about family and how important the family is and making time for the family, whether it's valuing the family or, as Dennis says, IRS. And I believe you've written one book. I know you've written more books, so let me phrase this differently. I know one of the books that I believe you're in is called Mom and Dadpreneurs. And I think that is such an important issue. How do you handle being as successful, as out in the open as you are, while being a family man? And I know there's more to the story than I just put into this question, but could you share for everybody in the audience how you manage that and what matters to you in that?
No, thank you. It's a great question. By the way, yeah, all these were books, and one of them is Success Habits of Super Achievers that Dennis, Brian, Les Brown, John Assaraf, Darren Hardy are all part of, and that's a more recent one. But Mom and Dadpreneurs, yeah, I feel like I did catch that pass early on, that family is the most important thing. So people would say, wow, Kyle, you're just so busy. Well, I was busy. Time was blocked out though. So if someone said, hey, I'm flying in, and this still exists even though my kids are grown now, but if I'm flying in, can you pick me up at the airport? Can we have lunch? The answer was probably no. I mean, I had a business I was running, and my nights and weekends were reserved for my kids and my family, right? I was the soccer coach. I was Indian Princess dad with my daughter. And I think you just have to be intentional to do that. I always say God, and I'm speaking from a man's perspective here, and I think this 100% would be a woman's perspective too, maybe just changed a little bit differently in how this was something I remember saying, okay, so I'm at this, 27, 28. So I'm trying to conquer the world in business because I didn't have a business background. I was having to learn this on the go. I'm trying to understand marriage with someone from the opposite sex that thinks differently. Than I don't know if I understood that completely at 27, how different men and women can be. And I'm also now supposed to parent. So here's 3 of the toughest jobs that I'm loaded with ignorance about, all at the same time. And I don't know why it's set up that way, but it is set up that way oftentimes. And so you just got to make it a priority and just realize, if I had to give someone advice, I'll say less is more in business. More is not more. Having more refined ideas. I've had some ideas that became big, and that took some refined thinking. Sometimes you have to let go of a lot to really make the 1 or 2 things big. So it's not about more, it's about quality. And now with family time, I learned from Brian Tracy, it is about more. He's like, more opportunities, because if you are restricted on the amount of time you can spend with your family, excuse me, sorry.
Okay.
You might miss the moments because, as you know, we're all human beings. And some parents think, okay, I'm with my kids. Why aren't they talking? Why aren't they, why are they in a bad mood? Well, that's just part of life, right? And you just never know those moments that it's going to be the magical moments. So quality time with your family is really important. Quantity time with your family is really important. Quality time in business, though, having refined less quality time, I have found that there's truth in that.
So the last part that you just mentioned reminds me of how sometimes we talk to people, and this is moving away from the family just for a second. I'll get back to that. You call them up and they go, I'm busy. And it's like, okay, are you busy, like busy, or are you productively busy? And you just mentioned, quality time and refinement. So how do you deal with all the programs that you have, from the masterminds to the book program to the events? How you then, I don't know, compartmentalize, or how do you make it work? Because you could probably say, I'm busy. How do you make it work?
A lot. Yeah, that is a common thing I say. So I think in the beginning, so people say, how'd you create all this? Well, one year at a time. So it's like a music, a band, right? A rock band or whoever. They're going to come out with a new album every 1 to 2 years. So in the beginning, they don't have anything. But at the end of 10 years, they have 5 albums. So when you see someone that's really successful that you want to be like, just think in terms of how long did it take them. So again, go create one thing that's really, really good. And then go create another thing that's really good. Now, as you start creating things, hopefully you build systems and you attract the right people to work with. And then you have to prune, right? If you have a garden, if you have trees, you do have to prune. And so it really is about time. It's having a farming mentality. farming says if I want pecans, it's going to take 5 years. I used to have a vineyard. If I want a vineyard, it's going to take 5 years, not 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go plant a vineyard and have wine in a year. It's going to take 5 years, and it's going to take another 5 years to create that. And so I think it's the same way in business, Natalie. People want to build too much too fast, and they don't give themselves the time to attract the right team, build the right systems, create really good products. I'm definitely not a fan of just throw it up and let it hit the wall. I am a fan. I call myself a principle-based marketer. So I am a marketer, but it's principle-based strategic marketer. And the number one key to having a principle-based product is to make it really good, right? So if you have really great products, so I have one that I created that sold 6 million copies of, right? It was this Jim Rohn quote book that had a to and a from, and it was a bit of a God download. And I did them for Zig, I did them for Brian, Tracy, and those went on to move 2 million, but that came after a lot of thought. And it really checked all these different boxes. I have this thing called the wheel, and the wheel has 5 things that you have to think about to get a spoke. And so I think a lot of people skip the strategic part, and sometimes they skip, how can I make this really great where it's going to knock down all the other dominoes? And they want to just build too fast because they see someone else, but they don't really realize it took time for the person that they're wanting to emulate to create those products or to create that customer base or to build that team. The team's the hardest part, in my opinion. And I don't go hire. I try and attract. Everything I do, I want to attract versus pursue. I'm a fisherman versus a hunter in how I market and how I want to attract a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I was going to ask you, you're a mind reader too, because the question I was going to ask, Natalie asked, and you answered so eloquently, and I do think it's important. You've combined so many different aspects. One is time for people to understand. I think we're in a disposable world where everything is fast and quick and and cheap, and if it doesn't work today, we throw it out and get something else. And what you talk about with time is back when we were in agrarian culture, predominantly had agrarian entrepreneurs. They understood that if they planted something, there was a season, and you couldn't harvest before that season, and it might be multiple times before you had enough in terms of your stock. And what I would ask, I guess, is for people who are listening now and who don't have that sense because they haven't grown up that way, they have been exposed to, the information that we've all been exposed to in the last 40, 50, since we become an industrial or now an information age. How do you help people? How could you help people to understand this better than you do it adequately? I mean, beautifully, but for some people, it's just an intellectual concept that they don't really embody. It's not like they don't own the concept. So they go, yeah, time, but they don't get it. How can we better help people understand that it will take time?
It really is back to philosophy. And being a Jim Rohn student, Jim was very principle-based, talked a lot about nature. And, Dennis, obviously, Brian, obviously, while you were asking the question, a thing popped in my head. So I'll share this that is semi-related. It's a cousin to what you're asking, but it's still the same principle. There are people I know, people I massively respect, that teach multiple streams of income. And one person comes to mind, he's got like 40. And so he's all over the place. He's spread 1,000 different ways. Another person I know has got like 3, and he's worth more than most of these people put together. And he's made it really simple. And so sometimes we're attracted to the busyness, as Natalie talked about. We're attracted to, I watch, people are so attracted. Oh, multiple streams, 40 streams. Let me, and then they miss the one thing that could be the gold mine. And it all gets back to philosophy. And Jim Rohn in his 5 major pieces life puzzle talked about number 1 is philosophy. Activities number 2, but philosophy, where are you going? What is the set of the cell? And I think once you figure out how it works out there, and it's tempting. It's tempting to get, excited for the get rich quick thing, and then the secret thing that no one else knows and's talking about. And, Jim Rohn said, be a student, learn from everyone, but make sure everything you do is the product of your own conclusion. So I say, take it all in. I'm not afraid to listen to anything or anyone, just take it all in. But then you have to decide based on your personality, based on your goals, based on what really resonates with you, the life you want to build. And I do think, Rex, it is unique for everyone. So there is this self-discovery process. So, Jim Rohn talked about journals. I've kept a journal for 30 years. Brian was talking about writing down your 10 goals. I call mine intentions. Intentions work better for me than goals. But it's incredible when they happen. Now they don't always happen. And then I have a list of long-term intentions and a long list and then a list of short-term intentions. And then I have a place where I put the ones that happen and I check them off. And every year I have my top 20 things that happen that year. So I think you've got to enjoy the process. You've got to find out what works for you. Did I create all this by myself in a vacuum? No, it was by being a student of Dennis and Brian and Jim and trying out what works for me. And the last thing I'll say is I have done some things that really have, nailed it when it comes to that thing. And then I've done some things that I have massively failed at. I'm 60 and there are a couple of things I can't believe I missed it. Wow, I was so great here and I was so fooled over here and didn't do the right things. So we are humans. We are imperfect. The main thing is to keep asking yourself the right questions, get around the right people, and find what really works for you. And that's going to make you happy. That's going to help you check those boxes.
I love it. Natalie?
Yeah, I got to follow up, obviously, on that one. We've talked over the last 2.5 days also about failure, whether failure is necessary. There are all these different schools of thought. Failure is necessary, fail forward. Yesterday, I learned failure is the fertilizer. I wrote that down. So you just mentioned, you've got huge successes and then huge failures. How important do you think it is to experience failures and curveball? Are there such things as failures if you're actually learning from them?
Yeah, I think I don't know on the curveball part that I think that's less important, that we try and describe if it's a failure or not, and just say failure is part of life. It is part of how we learn. There are some things we learn quickly. It's like, man, I get that and I celebrate that. And then there's other things I am on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 1 or a 2, and I'm having to learn as I go. But I would submit that, back to what Brian was talking about, responsibility, that some of my biggest challenges, which could also be called failures, maybe sometimes they were failures, sometimes they were challenges though, right? Things that happened have all become the things that I've grown the most. They've helped me find a new opportunity if I was patient enough to let it play out. And so as Jim Rohn would say, the key from failure is that you learn from it. It is possible to keep failing over and over and over and never learn from it. It's not automatic that failure is going to be good, but there is that, as Brian, I think, nailed it by saying, how are you going to handle the challenge, the attack, the problem, the mistake? Are you going to learn from it? Or are you going to keep repeating it? And it does take some self-awareness. It does take, a mindset to learn from it. So not all failure is not failure. Some failure is repeated failure if we're not willing to learn from it. And I got to say, some of the things I'm looking at in my own life are things I haven't learned from. And you know why? for me specifically, it's because I'm too fixated on certain other things. Like I fixated on these three things and have ignored these three things and thought I had the answer over here. And I haven't been as self-aware about it, right? And again, that's maybe back to our wiring. It's back to different things. But that is the power. You know, you mentioned masterminds earlier on. And, you know, the one I'm a part of is the people. If you have enough people in your world that can reflect back to you successes that are different than you have. It's like, okay, this person's a great investor. This person's got great health. This person's a great parent. This person has great relationships. This person is a brilliant business mind, a brilliant marketer. Now you have something to kind of say, I'm doing good here, but I'm doing really bad over here. And so who you hang around with is important, you know, and putting yourself in those environments that it's not just your own clique of people that think like you.
Wow. Absolutely.
Well, I would just say it's really great to be able to talk to you because you exemplify the principle-based acquisition and learning. And for so many who are listening, if they take the principles that you are offering to us, they will benefit in so many ways. We all will. I think that it's really fascinating because one of the things that you said is that the person who had 3 businesses was richer than the people that had all the others. And so I think sometimes in the personal development field, people think or are oftentimes driven as if it's just money that everybody's after. You know, it's success, fame, money. We've heard Dennis say it, you know, or Brian say, I wasn't really, or you talk about Jim, you know, I'm not really that interested in the fame. It's not that. If I can impact a few people who can impact the many, I'm good with that. You know, but there are people who want to be better with their family, or they want to live in a little piece of land somewhere away from everything else, and they just want to have this kind of pleasant lifestyle and live without, you know, worry. Somebody else may just want to learn how to play the piano and enjoy, you know, creating music in their life. It's not just about financial success or about, you know, creating massive business. The funny part about it is, I think, is that you can do whatever you intend to do. And what you point out is to attract and to you put it out there. I was saying, you know, if you throw out a boomerang comes back, not a teacup. You know, it is one of those things that if you put it out there and you want your ideal lifestyle or your ideal clients or your ideal business partners, what you're saying is give it time and do the right things. And no matter what happens, if you can learn from it and grow from it, you will ultimately be successful. But am I close to what you're saying?
Yes. So the first part of what you're saying, I 100%, I agree with both. But the first part of what you're saying about how do you define success?
Yeah.
100%. I think it's so important for people to define success for them. Yeah. And I just got a example here. So like my son who's grown, if he makes a sandwich, if we make sandwiches, right? And I'm eating my sandwich, I catch myself thinking, how could I sell sandwiches? How could I go market this sandwich? How about if I had a takeout? How about if I owned a restaurant? When he's sitting there enjoying his sandwich. Right. Now, who's more sophisticated in their thought? The marketer or the person who's actually enjoying the moment, right? And so I get to learn from him, you know, it's about being present. And so here I'm out of balance over here, and here he is showing me a different way to experience life. So Jim Rohn would say, discover what makes you happy. And that, you know, if you can do that, that makes you a massive success. On the second part of it, Rex, I do think there are formulas. You know, Brian Tracy would talk about how to make a Caesar salad, right? Well, there's XYZ ingredients, and they have to be put in the right order. You know, there is a bit of a science to all success. And so, yes, having the intention, like when I talk about attraction marketing, it does also go without saying you have to do the right things, right? You have to have the right product, the right audience. There are certain things you'll need to do. But granted, if you know how to do them, for your industry. And, you know, and part of that's just watching what your competition does and trying to learn what they do, what already works.
Okay, so we have our next panel of thought leaders, but I get to have my question answered,
Yeah, okay.
Kyle, because look, Napoleon Hill, all the way back to Napoleon Hill, we know many of our thought leaders have a closet spiritual life, or Napoleon Hill was not closet about it, but we've been closet about it overall, right? So many of our audience has this feeling of, you know, supernatural, miraculous that is actually natural, word, whatever you want to label it. Tell us about one of those moments that you felt Jim Rohn there with you.
Wow, Adora, you're going to go there. Okay.
Sure am.
You know, I have received messages from Jim. They're crazy. If you were to take, you know, if you let them play out, it's incredible. And we don't have time to go there, and I just don't think it's the right place to share that specific stuff. But I will say this. Phil Collin of Def Leppard, who I filmed with, did a mastermind at my house, and him and his wife and Debbie Blackwell, who's also a singer for Delta Deep that Phil does some stuff with, she was there too. And by the end of the day, Debbie and Phil's wife, Helen, came up to me crying. And they're like, this has been the most incredible time. And the people here, they just were crying. And they've done this thousands of times, right? Backstage, meet and greet, and they're like, something magical. And then Debbie shared with me, she felt her son, who had been murdered a couple of years before, really felt his presence. And I said, well, I feel Jim Rohn's presence. And we had that conversation, and that was 6 years ago, and her and I still talk about it. But then they said, you know, we've done this thousands of times. This was in the top 10 experiences we've ever had because of whatever was there. And so she felt her son, I felt Jim Rohn. I have done talks before where at the end I'll be wrapping it up talking about Jim Rohn said, because of, you know, because of examples, because of testimonials, you can achieve anything you want. It's out there. And I would then kind of go into what I felt like Jim Rohn's telling that group. And you could hear a pin drop. And they're crying, I'm crying. I don't have that ability. You know, this isn't something I'm polished telling, you know, the audience that I've rehearsed 10,000 times. It really happens in real time, authentically. And I don't say if I don't feel it, but there have been times I felt it. And
well, we're bringing you back then on our spiritual, we're doing a spiritually quantum physics based event coming up in the first quarter. So we're going to take you deep into that. All right, Kyle, we'll bring our oracles around you so that, no, just kidding. Just kidding. Kind of. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the new Psychology of Winning tour. We just heard some incredible insights, and that conversation went everywhere. I don't think there was a subject matter that was missed, whether it was mentally, spiritually, relationally, financially, physically. Kyle, you covered it all, brother. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and really well done, guys. Good job. Congrats.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that coming from you.
I'm honored to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.